Eli stepped out of the transport pod with a clumsy hop, immediately catching his foot on a stray magnetic field tether and spinning in a half-circle that ended with him facing the polished floor of the Viridian 9 Palace lobby. The place looked like a cross between a crystalline forest and a zero-gravity amusement park, with translucent towers that pulsed faintly like living jellyfish and ribbons of light arching between them that responded to the thoughts of anyone who passed beneath. Eli had been warned that attending an alien royal celebration was not like attending a human gala, but no amount of briefings could have prepared him for the sensation of his brain being mildly nudged by the palace's ambient neural field. His stomach twisted nervously as he tried to remember if it was polite to bow, wave, or simply float in midair. Gravity here was mostly optional, which made walking a challenge and made his shoes feel like tiny, unpredictable rockets. A hovering tray of beverages floated past, wobbling gently, and Eli lunged at it reflexively, knocking a neon blue drink into the air, only to have it bounce off a spherical robot waiter shaped like a grinning alien cat. The robot, apparently programmed for perfect etiquette, performed a flawless somersault and landed upright, giving Eli what he could only interpret as a very judgmental glare. He mumbled an apology and stepped back, narrowly avoiding a dessert sphere shaped like a miniature planet that drifted lazily toward his head. Somehow, in all this chaos, no one seemed offended. If anything, they regarded his fumbling with curiosity, as though humans were naturally entertaining. Eli found this both reassuring and terrifying. As he attempted to regain some dignity, his eyes landed on her. She moved through the crowd with an elegance that made Eli instantly aware of his own clumsiness, her long ears sweeping behind her in a way that suggested both grace and a peculiar kind of mischief. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, caught his gaze for a fraction of a second, and he felt an odd mix of intimidation and fascination. He had been warned that alien women often had subtle ways of testing humans, and he suspected this was one of those moments. She smiled faintly, and Eli's stomach threatened to tie itself in knots again. "Don't embarrass yourself further," he muttered under his breath, which caused him to trip over a floating platform that had decided to rotate unexpectedly. He barely caught himself, thinking that if he survived the evening without either dying or accidentally insulting the queen, it would be a personal miracle. The palace itself was alive with activity. Guests from dozens of species mingled in floating clusters, their forms occasionally flickering as if some of them were only partially in phase with reality. One guest, a reptilian diplomat with more eyes than a reasonable mind could process, offered Eli a drink. He took it awkwardly, immediately spilling half of it into the holographic garden that projected tiny, glowing flowers midair. The flowers responded with an embarrassed flicker, retreating momentarily into the walls. Eli cursed softly, realizing that even minor mistakes here could have unintended, almost comical consequences. Eli's attention was drawn to the queen, a vision of serene authority who floated through her court with a quiet grace that seemed to anchor the otherwise chaotic celebration. Her robes shimmered with shifting colors, and her every gesture caused faint, musical vibrations in the air. As he watched, Eli noticed a subtle disturbance, a glimmer of something out of place. A server, humanoid in shape but with a slightly off-kilter motion, carried a drink toward the queen. Its movements were precise, but something about the way the light refracted through the cup made Eli pause. He squinted, frowning. His gut, already on edge from alien gravity and alien etiquette, told him that something was wrong. He took a deep breath and reminded himself, "Eli, you're here to observe, not to save the universe. Stay calm." And then the cup wobbled in the server's hand, a tiny drip catching the edge of the rim, and his survival instincts screamed at him. That was no ordinary drink. He scrambled, attempting to approach the server without drawing attention, which in a zero-gravity ballroom full of multitasking aliens proved more difficult than expected. Eli stumbled over a floating chair, grabbed a low-hanging chandelier that seemed to hum with amusement, and narrowly avoided a miniature hovering dragon that had escaped from the children's entertainment area. The alien woman with the long ears appeared at his side, her expression teasing as she pointed subtly toward the drink. "You really don't want that to reach her," she said, voice calm and laced with amusement. Eli blinked at her, caught off guard. He had not expected help, much less from someone so mysterious. Thanks," he said, feeling his voice wobble under the weight of both gravity's ambiguity and his own incompetence. The next few moments were a blur. Eli devised a plan that was part genius, part desperation. He activated a miniature drone he had smuggled in as a personal observation assistant, a device shaped like a cartoonish space cat that emitted tiny bursts of smoke for dramatic effect. The drone zipped toward the cup, nudged it gently with a retractable arm, and caused it to hover in midair just out of reach. The server, distracted by a holographic butterfly that emerged from the walls, did not notice. Eli tried to appear casual, waving at a cluster of shimmering diplomats and failing miserably as his foot brushed against a floating dessert orb that ricocheted off a wall with a loud plink. The alien woman laughed softly, long ears flicking in amusement, clearly enjoying the chaos. "I didn't think humans were capable of such theatrical subtlety," she murmured. Finally, with a combination of clever timing, a well-aimed puff from the drone, and a fluke trajectory that could only be described as lucky, the cup veered away from the queen's path. Eli almost fell in relief, catching himself on a hovering railing that swung like a pendulum. Queen Leora continued her approach, completely oblivious to the danger she had narrowly avoided, smiling graciously at her guests. The alien woman glanced at Eli and raised an eyebrow, a silent acknowledgement of his improbable success. Eli, still catching his breath, couldn't help but think that if he survived this evening without collapsing from nerves or ending up permanently stuck to a floating chandelier, it would be nothing short of miraculous. The hum of the palace continued around him, the strange light of the crystalline towers bathing the scene in surreal colors, and for a moment, Eli felt the peculiar thrill of being exactly where he was not supposed to be, doing exactly what he never imagined he could manage. Eli was still reeling from the narrow avoidance of disaster when he realized that saving a queen in a palace filled with zero-gravity hazards and semi-sentient decor was only the beginning. The alien woman with the long ears hovered nearby, her eyes glinting with amusement as she observed his awkward attempts to regain composure. "You really should practice your heroics," she said lightly, her tone like a playful reprimand. "Or at least learn to float without flailing." Eli nodded, swallowing hard, feeling his cheeks heat under the multicolored light that shimmered off the palace walls. He had never felt more conspicuous in his life, yet strangely, he also felt like he belonged in this absurd, chaotic ballet of elegance and danger. The poisoned drink incident had attracted attention, though not in the way Eli feared. Queen Leora's advisors, a mix of species with varying levels of suspicion and mild paranoia, had quietly taken note of him, though the queen herself appeared blissfully unaware of the near miss. Eli tried to melt into the background, but in zero gravity, the background tended to float away, and he found himself bumping into a holographic fountain that erupted with neon fish, scattering them into a gentle flurry of panic. The alien woman snorted, long ears twitching in amusement, and Eli felt a small spark of camaraderie. Perhaps chaos was universal, and some beings simply appreciated it more than others. The evening continued with a dizzying parade of events. Floating delicacies hovered near the guests' faces, each bite requiring careful timing to avoid collisions with hovering chandeliers or wandering robotic servers. Eli attempted to enjoy a slice of crystalline fruit, only to have it bounce off a ceiling panel and ricochet onto a diplomat from a three-headed amphibian species, causing an apologetic chorus that sounded more like musical notes than speech. The alien woman leaned close and whispered, "I think your impact on this celebration is officially documented as entertaining." Eli muttered a nervous laugh, wishing he could disappear entirely into a floating void of invisibility. Amid the chaos, Eli noticed something unsettling, a subtle pattern of glances and gestures among the palace staff. Nothing overt, but enough to suggest that the poisoned drink was not a random act. He leaned toward the alien woman and whispered, "Do you think this is just the first attempt?" She nodded slightly, ears flicking, and muttered under her breath, "First of many, if we're lucky." Eli blinked, unsure if she meant luck as in survival or as in comedy, but he understood the message. The night was far from over. Eli's awkward heroics had given him a curious advantage. The queen's advisors seemed uncertain whether to trust him or monitor him, and in the resulting limbo, he found opportunities to observe, to eavesdrop, and crucially, to survive. He and the alien woman began a tentative collaboration, their movements occasionally synchronized with surprising efficiency. At one point, Eli attempted to redirect a floating tray carrying suspicious liquids away from the queen, only to accidentally launch it into a hovering garden sculpture that collapsed into a cloud of sparkling pollen. The alien woman caught him mid-fall, her long ears brushing his arm as she stabilized him with a small, graceful push. "You really do create chaos wherever you go," she said with a smile, and Eli felt both embarrassed and oddly encouraged. Their collaboration took on a rhythm of slapstick and ingenuity. Eli would flail in a humanly awkward way, the alien woman would adjust his trajectory or redirect objects with precision, and together they prevented several minor incidents from escalating into full-blown disasters. At one point, Eli accidentally triggered a hovering cake cannon that showered guests in confectionery, prompting laughter from some and mild outrage from others. The alien woman ducked behind a floating pillar, long ears twitching, and muttered, "You really should consider a career in entertainment instead of diplomacy." Eli grinned sheepishly, realizing that even in a palace on an alien world, humor could diffuse tension in ways diplomacy sometimes could not. As the night progressed, Eli discovered that the poisoned drink was part of a larger scheme. A shadowy figure moved among the guests with deliberate subtlety, and Eli, with his newfound confidence and ridiculous improvisational skills, began to track the pattern of their movements. The alien woman, now openly guiding him, whispered about the palace's security measures, which included anti-gravity laser grids that hummed faintly, walls that shifted in response to emotional states, and sentient chandeliers that occasionally swatted at unauthorized hands. Together, they navigated these hazards, often narrowly avoiding collisions that would have sent Eli hurtling into the upper galleries or impaling himself on a decorative crystal. The combination of danger and absurdity made him feel more alive than ever. Finally, the critical moment arrived. The shadowy figure attempted to move again toward the queen with a disguised drink, and Eli, armed with nothing more than quick reflexes, a hovering cat-shaped drone, and a growing sense of daring, leaped into action. The alien woman, her long ears trailing dramatically behind her, coordinated silently with him, signaling the perfect timing. In a sequence that was part genius, part luck, part ridiculous improvisation, Eli intercepted the cup midair, inadvertently sending it spinning into a wall that absorbed it harmlessly with a soft pop. The queen, once again blissfully unaware of the danger, continued her procession, while the shadowy figure melted back into the crowd, thwarted but unseen. Eli collapsed into a nearby floating bench, breathing heavily, glitter from previous incidents still clinging to his jacket, while the alien woman raised an eyebrow in mild admiration. "You may actually survive the evening," she said, tone teasing but approving. Eli nodded, feeling a mixture of exhaustion, exhilaration, and disbelief. By the time the celebration was winding down, Eli had not only survived but had gained the attention of both Queen Leora and her long-eared aide. He had stumbled, flailed, and fumbled his way into their trust, his human awkwardness strangely disarming in a court accustomed to calculated poise. Humor had become an unspoken ally. The palace's inhabitants seemed to find delight in his chaos, and in that unexpected rapport, Eli realized that bravery was not just about preventing death, it was also about navigating absurdity with enough composure to be noticed. As the last of the floating fireworks fizzled and dissolved into colored mist, Eli looked at the alien woman with long ears, who gave him a slight, approving nod. Somewhere between laughter and panic, he had done what few could. Survived, succeeded, and even entertained, and in the peculiar physics of Viridian 9, that combination might be more valuable than heroics alone. Eli was still catching his breath from the night's chaos when he was summoned to a private chamber in the palace, a space that seemed to float between dimensions rather than sit on any solid floor. The walls pulsed softly with colors that responded to the mood of those inside, turning a calming green as he entered, though he suspected they would flicker to a mocking pink if he tripped again. The alien woman with long ears was already there, seated on a hovering platform that rotated lazily, ears twitching with amusement as she watched him struggle to untangle himself from the subtle effects of the chamber's anti-gravity field. "You're late," she said, though she wasn't even looking at him. "Or early, depending on how you interpret time here. Either way, stop flailing like a human trying to wrestle a cloud." Eli could only manage a sheepish grin, realizing that even in a palace designed to honor elegance and sophistication, humor had a place, and his own awkwardness had become part of the rhythm. Queen Leora entered moments later, gliding with effortless poise, her robe shimmering with shifting patterns that mirrored the ambient lights of the chamber. Eli found himself instinctively straightening, attempting to look presentable despite the confetti, glitter, and sticky remnants of alien confections still clinging to his clothes. The queen's gaze, however, was warm rather than judgmental, and Eli felt a strange relief wash over him. Her violet eyes studied him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried both authority and a playful curiosity. "Eli, you have turned a night of potential disaster into something remarkable. Tell me, do all humans perform heroics in such a chaotic fashion?" Eli swallowed, unsure whether to laugh, apologize, or bow. He settled for a nervous chuckle. "I like to keep things interesting," he said, which earned a faint smile from the queen. The alien woman with long ears hovered slightly behind him, long limbs and ears blending into the ambient glow, and whispered, "Interesting is one word for it. Hazardous is another, but you've earned attention, I'll give you that." Eli gave a small nod, realizing she wasn't entirely displeased. The chamber itself seemed to lean in, as though curious about how a single human could navigate both physical chaos and political intrigue with such improvised efficiency. Queen Leora gestured and a pedestal rose from the floor, revealing a small artifact enclosed in a softly glowing field. It was unlike anything Eli had ever seen, a crystalline device that pulsed in time with the viewer's heartbeat and shimmered with faint holographic images that seemed to anticipate thought. The Queen explained that it was a sentient artifact, capable of translating ideas into reality, long sought for its ability to stabilize volatile planetary systems and resolve interspecies disputes. "It is rare," she said, "and it requires careful stewardship. I believe you have proven capable of thinking quickly, improvising, and navigating the unexpected, all necessary traits." Eli reached out, half expecting it to electrocute him or sprout tiny legs and walk away. Instead, it hovered lightly in his hand, warm and almost comforting, as if recognizing him as its new keeper. The alien woman raised an eyebrow. "Try not to accidentally create a floating army of confetti cats," she murmured, and Eli laughed, a real, unself-conscious laugh that carried through the chamber. They spent the next hour exploring the artifact's abilities, Eli experimenting cautiously, causing small, humorous misfires that made the alien woman chuckle. He accidentally projected a miniature storm of glittering holographic birds, which flew in erratic loops before dissolving, and a tiny floating tea set that insisted on serving invisible guests. The Queen watched with amusement rather than irritation, clearly enjoying the chaos that contrasted with the controlled grace of her court. Eli began to understand that this reward was not merely a tool of power, but a challenge to grow, to think in ways that blended creativity with responsibility. During this time, he and the alien woman spoke more freely, their conversation shifting from teasing remarks to strategic observations. She explained aspects of palace politics, the delicate alliances between species, and the subtle manipulations that had led to the poisoning attempt. Eli listened, absorbing more than he expected, realizing that bravery alone was not enough. Understanding, trust, and diplomacy mattered just as much. Humor, he discovered, could be a bridge between worlds just as much as skill or courage. By the time the discussion ended, Eli felt a transformation within himself. The awkward, flailing human who had stumbled through the celebration now carried a quiet confidence. He understood that survival in unfamiliar worlds required more than reflexes. It required attention, adaptability, and the willingness to embrace chaos rather than fear it. He had learned to read the subtle cues of alien culture, to anticipate danger, and to work in tandem with beings whose perceptions were utterly different from his own. And unexpectedly he had formed a bond, not only with the Queen, who had entrusted him with incredible responsibility, but with the long-eared alien woman,